She accepted the alpha's rejection and the pack went silent until the alpha king lost control. The forest was quiet, but not with peace. Mist curled around the tall trees like soft, pale fingers, and the distant sound of rushing water echoed through the shadows. Lyra walked carefully along the path, her boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves. She had grown used to the forest's silence, yet today it felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She carried herself with calm determination, but inside her heart beat like a wild drum. Today she would face Kale, the Alpha King. The thought of him brought both warmth and fear. Kale was strong, powerful, and commanding. Every time he entered a room, even the bravest members of the pack bowed in respect. And yet for Lyra, he was more than the Alpha. He was a storm, a presence that made her pulse quicken and her chest ache with longing she could not name. The pack had gathered in the clearing, their silent forms blending with the mist. The moon hung low and silver in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. At the center stood Kale, his dark cloak moving slightly in the wind, eyes like polished obsidian watching the gathering. Every movement was deliberate, every glance a command. Lyra approached slowly, keeping her head high. She had heard the whispers, the pack speculating about what she and Kale might mean to each other. She had heard their rumors of love, of alliances, and even of rivalry. But today, she would hear it from Kale himself. The Alpha's voice cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. Lyra. The single word carried both authority and a hidden weight that made her heart catch. She bowed slightly, as custom demanded, but kept her gaze on him. She began, but Kale's sharp gesture stopped her. He did not need words. His eyes, piercing and unyielding, told her already what she feared. "You know why we are here," he said, his voice low and steady. "And you know what I must say." Lyra swallowed hard. She had imagined this moment countless times, but imagining it and living it were two different things. She nodded slowly, though every part of her screamed against it. "I accept your decision, Alpha King," she said, her voice soft but steady. The words felt strange, like accepting a winter chill that cut through the skin. The pack gasped, or maybe it was the wind. It was hard to tell. Silence followed her words, so thick it pressed against her chest. Kale's expression did not change, but his eyes betrayed him. A flicker of something, regret, longing, or perhaps pain, crossed his sharp features. Then, as if the moment had been rehearsed 1,000 times, he turned and raised his hand. The pack obeyed without hesitation, falling into formation, leaving Lyra standing alone with her decision echoing in the clearing. The clearing was silent. Not a leaf moved, not a whisper passed. Lyra could feel the eyes of the pack on her, judging, questioning, waiting. And yet no one spoke. The pack had never been this quiet, not even in times of great danger. It was as if the forest itself had paused to watch the outcome of this single act of quiet courage. Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to run, to turn away from the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. She wanted to shout, to demand that Kale tell her the truth, to reveal the feelings she knew he held deep inside. But she did not. She bowed once more and walked away, letting the forest swallow her as she disappeared into the mist. Behind her, Kale's hand trembled slightly, though he quickly clenched it into a fist. The Alpha's control was absolute in appearance, but within, a storm raged. He had rejected her not because he did not care, but because he feared what his feelings might do to him, to her, to the pack. And now that the decision was spoken aloud, he felt the weight of it pressing down, threatening to crack the mask of control he had worn for so long. Lyra moved through the trees, the cold mist brushing against her skin. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had prepared herself for rejection, yet the reality of it cut deeper than she had imagined. Still, she had shown courage, and for now, that was all she could hold on to. She stopped by a small stream, its water silvered by moonlight. She leaned down, dipping her fingers into the icy flow, letting the chill steady her racing heart. The forest seemed to shift around her. Shadows lengthened and twisted, and for a brief moment, Lyra thought she saw a shape moving between the trees. A wolf, or something more. She could not tell. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. Perhaps it was only her imagination, stirred by the tension of the day. Yet she could not ignore the feeling that she was being watched. It was subtle, like a heartbeat echoing in the silence. She turned slowly, scanning the misty trees, but saw nothing. Only the stream, only the wind, only the soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet. Cale, meanwhile, had not returned to his chambers. He stood in the clearing, watching Lyra disappear into the forest. The pack had dispersed, but their eyes lingered on him. They had seen the flicker of emotion, the brief loss of control. The Alpha King was a figure of unshakable authority, yet in that moment he was human, and the pack had seen it. A growl rumbled low in his chest, a sound he could not entirely control. He had trained for years to master himself, to suppress every weakness, but the truth was simple and terrifying. He cared for Lyra more than he had allowed himself to admit. And now, her acceptance of his rejection threatened to undo all the control he had built around himself. In the forest, Lyra felt a presence. The mist shifted, and a faint whisper of air brushed her cheek. She turned sharply, but again, there was nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger, as if the forest itself recognized the tension between her and the Alpha King. She shivered, unsure whether it was fear or anticipation, and continued walking, letting the trees guide her deeper into the shadows. The night stretched long, and the moon moved slowly across the sky. Lyra finally came to a clearing where the trees opened to reveal a small glade. The grass was wet with dew, and the moonlight made it shimmer like silver. She sank to the ground, pressing her palms against the soft earth, grounding herself. And then she felt it again, the sense of being watched. She turned sharply, and this time she saw it. A wolf, its eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Its fur was dark, almost blending into the night, but its presence was undeniable. It did not move closer, only watched. Lyra held her breath, unsure whether to approach or flee. The wolf's gaze was not just wild, it was knowing, almost human in its intelligence. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. She realized with a mixture of awe and fear that this night, this forest, and perhaps this wolf were tied to something larger than herself. Something ancient, something that had been waiting. Far away, Cale finally left the clearing, walking swiftly through the mist. His mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions he could not fully name. He had always believed that control was strength, but the truth was clear. His heart had betrayed him before his mind could intervene. As Lyra stared into the eyes of the wolf, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Perhaps it was the forest, perhaps it was the quiet of the night, but she felt something shift within her. The rejection had been bitter, the silence of the pack heavy, but she was still standing. She was still herself, and yet somewhere deep inside she knew this was only the beginning. A distant howl pierced the night, low and mournful, echoing through the forest. Lyra's ears pricked. The wolf's eyes met hers, and in that gaze she saw both warning and promise. Something was coming, something that would change everything. Cale's voice, low and carried on the wind as if the forest itself spoke it, whispered her name. It was not a call, not a command, simply a word, full of longing, full of regret, full of everything unspoken. Lyra's heart stuttered at the sound, and in that moment, under the cold silver moon, the forest held its breath once more. For the first time, Lyra realized that rejecting an alpha's decision did not end the story. It began a new one. And the Alpha King, with all his strength and control, might not survive the next chapter without losing himself completely. The night was quiet again, but only for a heartbeat. Beyond the mist and shadows, something stirred, something ancient and powerful. And Cale, the Alpha King, was on the edge of losing control. The morning sun was weak that day, a pale silver light filtering through the mist that still clung to the forest like a lingering memory. Lyra walked along the winding path to the Alpha Keep, her cloak brushing against the damp leaves. The events of the night before still lingered in her mind: the rejection, the silence of the pack, and the unsettling feeling that something ancient had been awakened. The Alpha Keep loomed ahead, dark and imposing. Its towers rose like jagged teeth against the gray sky, and its stone walls seemed alive, whispering secrets of centuries past. Inside, Cale awaited, though the servants avoided his chambers today, sensing the storm that brewed around him. Rumors spread quickly through the pack. The Alpha King, calm and disciplined as always, had faltered yesterday, even for a moment. And when Cale faltered, the pack watched in silent awe and fear. Lyra reached the great hall and paused at the entrance. The room was vast and shadowed, the light of the morning struggling to pierce the tall windows. Cale sat at the head of the table, a figure of authority and quiet power. His dark hair fell over his brow, and his obsidian eyes were fixed on a distant point, as if the world beyond the walls held all the answers he sought. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Come forward." She obeyed, her heart tightening with every step. The tension in the room was almost tangible, like the air before a storm. The pack members who were present turned their heads slightly, their eyes curious, respectful, and wary all at once. No one dared speak, not even the usual chatter that filled the hall during morning gatherings. Cale's gaze shifted to her as she approached. It was sharp, assessing, and yet there was something hidden beneath it, a flicker of vulnerability, of emotions restrained for the sake of duty. Lyra felt it like a weight pressing on her chest. "You should not linger here," Cale said, his tone calm but firm. "The pack watches everything. You must guard your heart, Lyra, even from me." Lyra's lips pressed together. "And yet I am here," she said softly. "I am here because I cannot ignore the pack's unease, nor your own unrest." Cale's hand clenched briefly at his side, unseen by most but not by her. She had learned to read him in ways others could not. She had always sensed his moods, the shifts in his energy, the tiny gestures that betrayed what his words never would. And now more than ever she felt the tension coiling around him like a living thing. A sudden rumble echoed through the hall, a low vibration that made the stone beneath them tremble. The servants flinched, and even the pack members stiffened. Cale's eyes narrowed. "The curse," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "It awakens again." Lyra froze. The curse had been a story whispered through the pack for generations, an ancient force tied to the Alpha bloodline, dormant but never gone. It was said to stir when the emotions of the Alpha became unbalanced, when desire, anger, or longing grew too strong to be contained. And now, Cale's restraint, already fragile, was enough to awaken it. Before she could respond, the walls of the hall seemed to pulse faintly, shadows stretching like living tendrils. The temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy, as if the building itself was aware of the storm inside Cale. The pack muttered uneasily, the usual discipline wavering. Cale stood suddenly, his movements sharp and controlled, yet there was tension beneath his posture, a hint that the Alpha's mask of calm might crack. He moved toward the window, staring out at the forest. Lyra followed, her steps quiet. She felt the pull between them, the invisible threads of emotion that neither could fully sever. "You fear for me," Cale said finally, without turning. "But fear will not save the pack, neither will my restraint." Lyra's chest tightened. "You are not alone, Cale. I will stand with you whether you accept it or not." He finally turned to her, and for a brief moment the walls he had built around himself fell. His eyes were stormy, a mixture of longing and fear, and Lyra saw the truth behind the rejection. He had not pushed her away because of indifference, but because he feared losing control, fearing what his feelings could do to the pack, to her, and to himself. Suddenly, the air shifted again. The shadows in the corners of the hall thickened, curling like smoke. A voice, faint and ancient, seemed to whisper through the stone. Lyra shivered, sensing the presence of something older than the forest, older than the pack. The curse is not idle, Kale said, his voice tight. It watches, waiting for the alpha's weakness. And right now I am not strong enough. Lyra stepped closer. Then let me help you, she said. You do not need to face this alone. Kale's gaze softened, but the tension never left him. It is not so simple. The curse is tied to the alpha's heart. It feeds on weakness, and my heart is not mine alone to give. To falter is to endanger everyone. The ground beneath them rumbled faintly, and the shadows twisted more violently. The pack members stepped back instinctively, fear flickering across their faces. Even the walls of the hall seemed alive, murmuring in a language older than any living creature. Lyra's eyes met Kale's, and she could see the turmoil within him, the struggle between duty and desire, control and surrender. She reached out a hand, a simple gesture, and Kale did not flinch. It was a silent acknowledgement, a bridge across the storm between them. The pack feels it too, Lyra said softly. They sense your struggle, but they will follow you if you let them. You are not alone in this. Kale's jaw tightened. I fear that if I falter completely, I will lose myself, and perhaps more than myself. Before Lyra could respond, a loud crash echoed through the hall. The doors to the outer chamber burst open as a shadowy figure emerged, dark and shifting, unlike any wolf or man. It moved with fluid grace, a form of smoke and shadow, and the pack gasped in fear. Kale's eyes darkened and he stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the figure. His power radiated outward, a tangible force that made the shadows hesitate. The curse had stirred, drawn by his inner turmoil, and now it had taken shape. Lyra's heart pounded, fear mingling with the strange thrill of danger. She had always admired Kale's strength, but seeing him now, standing firm yet strained, made her see the true cost of leadership. The Alpha King bore not only the burden of power, but also the weight of emotions he could not allow himself to feel. The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through hollow trees, and Kale's eyes flared with a dangerous light. He raised a hand and the air around him seemed to crackle. Back, he commanded, his voice sharp and unyielding. I will not allow you to harm my pack. The shadow paused as if considering, then retreated slightly, only to reform again in the doorway. Lyra stepped closer to Kale, her presence steadying him, her hand brushing against his arm. For a moment the storm within him seemed to ease and the shadow's movement faltered. You see, Kale said quietly, almost to himself. Your presence, it steadies me. Yet I cannot falter fully in my feelings, not yet. Lyra nodded, her heart aching. I do not ask you to falter. I only ask that you let me stand by you. The shadow shifted again, darker now, stretching tendrils toward the pack. Kale's control wavered, and for the first time, Lyra saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, not of death, but of losing himself to the curse that had haunted his lineage for centuries. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the shadow recoiled, retreating into the corners of the hall. Kale lowered his hand, breathing heavily, his control returning but fragile. He glanced at Lyra, his gaze full of unspoken words. The storm within him had not passed, it had only been held at bay for now. The pack members whispered among themselves, their awe and fear mingling. Lyra's heart swelled with both concern and determination. She knew this was only the beginning. The curse was awakening, drawn to Kale's power and his emotions, and it would not rest until it had tested him completely. Kale turned to her, his voice low but steady. Stay close, Lyra. The night is not over and neither is the trial we face. Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening. I will not leave you, Kale, not now, not ever. Outside, the forest rustled, the wind carrying a faint, eerie howl. The shadows deepened, and the mist thickened, curling around the keep like fingers reaching for the Alpha King. The curse was stirring, the ancient force that had slept for generations now awake, and the bond between Lyra and Kale was the only thing strong enough to hold it at bay. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the wolf spirit watched, its glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight, knowing that the next moment would test not only Kale's control, but the strength of the connection he shared with Lyra. The forest, the pack, and the ancient powers all waited. And Kale, the Alpha King, teetered on the edge of losing control once more. The night had fallen heavy over the forest, and the mist crept across the land like a living, whispering veil. The moon hung pale and full above the Alpha Keep, casting silver light that danced across the stone towers. Inside the keep, the great hall was alive with shadows, and the air hummed with a tension that even the bravest members of the pack could feel. Kale stood at the center of the hall, his figure towering, every movement sharp and controlled. Yet tonight, there was something different in him, a flicker of unrest that had begun the moment Lyra had accepted his rejection. That single act, simple yet brave, had unsettled him in ways he could neither name nor deny. The pack watched in silence, their usual respect mingled with fear. For centuries, the Alpha King had been untouchable, a figure of flawless control. But tonight, Kale's power trembled at the edges, like a river threatening to overflow its banks. Lyra entered the hall cautiously, her cloak brushing softly against the stone floor. She had felt the pull of the forest, the presence of the wolf spirit watching, guiding her. She knew Kale was on the brink of losing control, and she would not stand aside. "Kale," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "The pack feels your struggle, but fear will not bind you. You must let me help you." Kale's eyes, sharp as obsidian, fixed on her. For a moment the Alpha's mask of control slipped. There was longing, regret, and an unspoken desire swirling in his gaze. He did not answer immediately. His hand trembled slightly at his side, a subtle signal that his inner turmoil had begun to consume him. The shadows in the corners of the hall seemed to grow darker, twisting and stretching toward him as if they fed on his uncertainty. The ancient curse had been awakened, drawn to the raw power of the Alpha King's emotions. It had waited for a moment like this, for a crack in his armor, and now it stirred, restless and dangerous. "Lyra," Kale finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "You do not understand what I carry. The curse, it is not merely a story. It is a living thing bound to the Alpha's heart, and tonight it hungers." Lyra stepped closer, her heart pounding. "I do understand, Kale. I know the danger, but I also know you. You are not alone. You do not have to face it by yourself." For a brief instant, Kale's features softened, but the shadows surged, wrapping around him like a storm of dark smoke. His power flared outward, shaking the walls of the keep, making torches flicker and the floor tremble beneath their feet. Even the bravest warriors stepped back, fear written on their faces. Lyra's hand reached toward him, and Kale did not move away. He felt the grounding strength in her presence, the calm determination that steadied him even as the curse clawed at his soul. Yet he could not surrender entirely. To falter completely was to risk the pack, to risk himself. The shadows writhed more violently, and a cold wind swept through the hall, carrying whispers older than the forest itself. They were not words exactly, but a force that pressed on the mind, a reminder of the curse's power. Kale's control wavered, his knees threatening to buckle, but Lyra's steady gaze held him upright. "You must let go, Kale," she said softly. "Not of your power, but of your fear. Only then can you be free." Kale's jaw clenched. His heart ached with longing and fear, a storm of emotion he had suppressed for years. He had rejected Lyra to protect her, to protect the pack, and to maintain the control that defined him. Yet the truth was undeniable. He desired her, and the weight of that desire was now entwined with the curse. The shadows shifted, forming shapes that resembled wolves, black, ethereal, eyes glowing with a pale light. They prowled at the edges of the hall, circling Kale like predators. The pack gasped in unison, sensing the danger. Kale extended his hand, summoning his power to hold the shadows at bay. The air crackled with energy, a tangible force pressing against every soul in the room. Lyra stepped even closer, placing a hand on his arm. The warmth of her touch was like a tether, anchoring him in the reality he feared to lose. "You are not alone," she repeated. "You are not your fear. You are not the curse. You are Kale, the Alpha King, and I believe in you." The shadows hesitated, as if the bond between them had disrupted the curse's hunger. Kale's breathing was heavy, each exhale a struggle. His eyes, black and stormy, met Lyra's, and in that gaze, centuries of fear, longing, and pain were laid bare. He wanted to reach for her, to let the emotions he had buried rise freely, but he feared the consequences. "You cannot save me," he whispered, his voice thick with both despair and yearning. "If I lose control, it will destroy everything, everyone." Lyra shook her head. "No, Kale, not if we face it together. I will not let you fall alone. And you will not lose control, not completely. Trust yourself. Trust us." The shadows surged again, faster, darker, more threatening. Kale's hands trembled, his power straining against the ancient force. The walls of the keep groaned, the torches flickered violently, and the pack could only watch in awe and fear. Lyra moved closer still, pressing her hand to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. It was strong, fierce, and trembling all at once. She spoke softly, each word deliberate, each syllable meant to ground him. "Kale, look at me. You are stronger than this curse. You are the Alpha. You are more than fear, and you are not alone. Feel my hand, my presence. Let it guide you." For a moment, the shadows recoiled. Kale's power stabilized slightly, though his body was tense, every muscle strained against the darkness that sought to consume him. His eyes softened, and the raw emotion in his gaze was almost too much to bear. The wolf spirit, still watching from the shadows beyond the hall, stirred and let out a low, haunting howl. It was a sound of warning, of recognition, and of something ancient acknowledging the bond between Kale and Lyra. The air seemed to shimmer, as if the forest itself had reached through the walls to lend strength. Kale's knees nearly buckled, and Lyra caught him, holding him upright. His hand hovered over hers, trembling, and in that small gesture, the storm inside him began to calm. The shadows hesitated, drawn back slightly, sensing the shift. You are my anchor," Kale said, his voice rough, almost breaking. I have never let anyone stand so close. Not like this." Lyra's eyes softened, tears glimmering in the silver light. "Then let me be your anchor, Kale. You do not have to face the storm alone. Not now, not ever." The shadows pulsed one last time, then began to retreat, dissipating into the corners of the hall like smoke blown away by wind. The curse had been held at bay, for now, though it would not be gone forever. Kale's control was not fully restored, but the bond between him and Lyra had strengthened enough to resist the ancient force. Kale sank to one knee, exhausted but steady. Lyra knelt beside him, her hand still resting on his arm. The pack watched in silence, all written on their faces. For the first time, they saw the Alpha not as untouchable, but as human, vulnerable, strong, and capable of love. The wolf spirit let out one final low howl, a sound that seemed to echo across the forest. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it disappeared into the night, leaving only the sense of its presence lingering in the mist. Kale's gaze met Lyra's, full of emotion he could no longer hide. "You have done something no one else could," he said softly. "You reached me where no one else could, and for that I am grateful." Lyra smiled faintly, her own heart aching with the weight of the night's events. "You do not need to thank me. You only need to survive, and I will stand by you until the end." The forest outside remained quiet, though the wind whispered secrets through the trees. The mist curled around the towers of the keep, and the moonlight cast silver shadows across the hall. The bond between Lyra and Kale had been forged in the storm of the curse, a bond stronger than fear, stronger than power, stronger than the darkness that threatened to consume them. And yet in the shadows, something lingered. The curse had been held back, not destroyed. Its hunger remained, watching, waiting for the moment Kale's heart might falter again. The night was far from over, and the Alpha King, though steadied by Lyra's presence, knew that the next challenge would come soon, and it would test not only his control, but the depth of the bond he shared with the woman who had dared to reach him where no one else could. Forest was alive with shadows that night, though the moon shone brighter than it had for many nights before. Mist curled like silver smoke around the gnarled trees, and the wind whispered secrets older than any living creature. Deep within the forest lay a clearing where ruins of an ancient temple had long been forgotten. Stones worn smooth by time and ivy twisted through the cracks, but the place still carried an air of power, as if the very ground remembered every spell, every oath, every battle that had been fought there. Lyra stepped into the clearing, her cloak brushing softly against the damp grass. Her heart was steady, though her thoughts were a whirlwind. Kale, the Alpha King, had not yet fully faced the curse that haunted his bloodline. The last night in the hall had been only a temporary calm, a pause before the storm. Tonight she would not let him face it alone. From the shadows of the trees she saw him, Kale. His figure was tense, every movement sharp and precise, yet a faint tremor betrayed his inner struggle. The moonlight caught his dark hair and the sharp line of his jaw, making him seem both majestic and painfully human. His eyes, obsidian and stormy, flicked toward her the moment she entered. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and controlled, though the tension beneath it could not be hidden. "You should not have come." "I will not leave you," she said simply, stepping closer. "Not now, not ever." Kale's hand trembled slightly, but he did not move away. The curse had grown stronger, feeding on his fear, his desire, his suppressed emotions. Shadows coiled at the edges of the clearing, twisting like smoke into forms that were almost human, almost wolf, almost something neither entirely alive nor dead. The ancient force had sensed the Alpha's vulnerability, and it had come to claim its due. Lyra's heart pounded. She could feel the raw energy of the curse pressing against her, testing her courage. She did not flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, placing her hand on Kale's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. It was strong, fierce, and trembling all at once. The bond they had begun to form over the past nights was now their lifeline, the tether that could hold the Alpha King against the storm of his own bloodline. "You cannot fight it alone, Kale," Lyra said softly. "But together, we can stand." Kale's gaze met hers, stormy, conflicted, and full of longing. He wanted to speak, to confess everything he had buried, but the weight of his duty held his words prisoner. Finally, he lowered his hand and allowed her to hold him, the gesture small, yet monumental. The shadows surged, drawn toward them like hungry predators. Kale's body tensed as the curse sought to feed on his fear. The ground trembled, and the air around them seemed to thrum with power. Lyra tightened her grip on him, grounding him, anchoring him with her presence. "Trust me," she said, her voice steady. "I am here, feel me, not as the pack, not as the world, but as someone who believes in you completely." The shadows twisted violently, but Lyra's presence seemed to slow them. Kale's power flared in response, bright and raw, a force that could have torn the forest apart. But instead of letting it run wild, he focused on her hand, on her words, on the bond that had grown stronger than fear, stronger than duty, stronger than the curse itself. "You are my anchor," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "I have never let anyone stand like this with me before." Lyra's lips curved into a faint, steady smile. "Then let me be your anchor, Kale. Let us face this together." The curse shrieked, a sound like 1,000 voices echoing through the forest, a sound that carried both anger and hunger. Shadows reached toward them, black tendrils twisting and snapping like living chains. Kale's hands rose instinctively, summoning his power, yet the raw force was erratic, fueled by fear and longing alike. Lyra pressed closer, murmuring words of calm and strength. The energy between them, the bond of trust and unspoken understanding, began to form a shield, faint at first but growing stronger with each heartbeat. Kale's eyes met hers, and in that gaze, centuries of fear, longing, and isolation were laid bare. The wolf spirit, silent and watchful from the edge of the clearing, let out a low, haunting howl, echoing through the mist. It was a sound of warning, of guidance, and of acknowledgement. The ancient force had been drawn by Kale's fear, but it was also drawn by the strength of the bond he shared with Lyra. The spirit seemed to lend its presence to them, reinforcing the tether that was keeping the curse at bay. Kale's knees threatened to buckle, and Lyra wrapped her arms around him, anchoring him to the present, to reality, to love. "Let go of fear, Kale," she whispered. "Let go of the need to control everything. Let the bond guide you, not the fear. You are not alone." The shadows surged one final time, twisting and writhing, then paused as if considering. Kale took a deep, shuddering breath, his body trembling with effort. Then slowly, he exhaled and let the tension flow outward. The raw force of the curse ebbed slightly, held at bay by the unity of their hearts and the strength of their bond. Lyra felt the warmth of his chest beneath her hands, the rapid beating of a heart that had carried so much burden for centuries. She leaned close, her forehead touching his, sharing her strength silently. Kale's hands hovered over hers for a moment, then relaxed, as if acknowledging her presence as the anchor he had long needed. The forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the mist curling back, the shadows dissipating, and the moonlight shining clearer than before. The ancient temple, though ruined and worn, seemed to pulse with calm energy, acknowledging the Alpha King's triumph, not of strength alone, but of trust, of surrender, and of love. Kale lowered to his knees fully, exhaustion washing over him, yet his eyes remained fixed on Lyra. I cannot express what I feel," he said softly. "You have reached me where no one else could, and for that I am grateful." Lyra smiled, her heart full. "You do not need to speak it. I can feel it in every part of you. You are here and you are alive, and that is enough." For a moment they sat together in the clearing, breathing in the cool night air, the sound of the forest surrounding them. The bond between them had been forged in the fire of the curse, tested by fear and strengthened by courage. The Alpha King, once alone and unyielding, now stood, or rather knelt, with someone who understood him completely. The pack, hidden at the edge of the forest, watched in awe. They had seen the Alpha on the brink of losing control, and now they saw him redeemed, not by force, not by authority, but by love, trust, and connection. Whispers of reverence moved through the trees, carried by the wind, as the legend of the Alpha King and the woman who had dared to reach him began to take form. The wolf spirit let out a final, low howl, fading into the night, leaving only a sense of peace and guardianship. The ancient force that had haunted Kale for generations had been held at bay, for now, but the bond between Lyra and Kale ensured it would never claim him easily again. Kale's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I have carried this burden for too long, believing that power alone could protect the pack, but I see now strength lies in trust, in love, in letting someone stand beside you." Lyra pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, a symbol of forgiveness, trust, and unwavering faith. "And I will always stand by you, Kale, through every shadow, every storm, every challenge. Always." For the first time in centuries, the Alpha King allowed himself to truly breathe, to feel, to surrender not to weakness, but to the strength of connection. The curse had been tested, the bond had held, and the night had proven that love and power could coexist. The mist slowly began to lift, revealing the stars above, the forest around them, and the distant glimmer of the pack returning to their den. Kale rose to his feet, standing beside Lyra, the weight of centuries of solitude and fear lifted, if only for a moment. And though the curse lingered, a faint presence in the corners of the night, it no longer threatened to dominate. Kale had faced it, not with force alone, but with courage, trust, and the surrender of his heart. The Alpha King, once solitary and unyielding, had found his equal, not only in strength but in spirit. And the woman who had dared to reach him, who had accepted the weight of his power and the depths of his soul, would remain by his side, forever a part of the legend that had begun in the forest, beneath the silver light of the moon. The night was calm at last, but in the hearts of Lyra and Cale, the fire of their bond burned brighter than any curse could ever dim. Together they had faced darkness, and together they had emerged stronger, united, and unbroken. The forest whispered its approval, the shadows retreated, and the Alpha King, steady, redeemed, and human, stood with the woman who had taught him that true strength came not from control, but from trust, love, and surrender.